Imagine you're on like ESPN or something, and like the producers are just talking through the commercials. They'd be like flipping out. We don't have to worry about that here because we're not very professional. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Axioms on Trial. We are going to do a clip breakdown on. Well, CISA probably can fill in the details here. I mean, I'll start with at least what I know, and that was just being kind of summoned on a video that was made that Cecil will get into. And then I was in the comment section with this person asking them for a formal argument. And I knew that they didn't have one. So I tried to just go as long as I could to see if I could finally get a premise out. And then they would just say, watch this video, watch this video, watch this video, which it is one of the worst videos I've ever seen. We probably won't touch everything that's wrong with it because there's so much wrong with it. The very first 3 seconds, it just does this crazy little bait and switch. But anyway, Cease, why don't you fill in the details and we'll just get into the video.
So for those that may have seen one of the last videos I did, I had this guy from TikTok basically start harassing me. He made like an hour-long video about me, calling me all kinds of names, saying I'm a sociopath, calling me a liar, claiming I threatened him, all kinds of totally insane things, projecting everything onto me. And I asked him, I said, well, if I threatened you anywhere, show me the receipts, because I know what I said. I never threatened you. I'm not that kind of person. And he claimed that I deleted the threats, that I went back and deleted those comments, or I went back and deleted those messages. Meanwhile, what I said, what I thought I said, was still there, was always there, which is what I actually said. So this guy is somebody who's clearly not okay mentally. But he thinks that he has this argument that shows that atheists, their views on the origin of reality are paradoxical, and that he thinks he has the best argument for God based on this observation that all other positions lead to some kind of paradox. And this is completely delusional. This is somebody who is just very clearly unaware of what the philosophy says on the matter, and he just Googled some things half-assed to fit his own agenda. And it's always the most ignorant, I find, who are the most arrogant and who get the angriest when challenged. So he's claiming in his videos that, like, I have an ego and I can't stand people disagreeing with me, and that I'm a bully and all these things. And it's all projection. Like he's the clearest example of psychological projection that I've ever encountered, to like almost a cartoonish degree. And yeah, so he has this video where he thinks that this is like the best argument for God, and it's just based on both a misunderstanding of physics and philosophy. And I was waiting to be able to break this down with you, and so I look forward to doing that. Apparently, he messaged me with saying that he's gonna make another video about me with more slender, which again I have no issues with. I mean, I think anybody who's seen my channel, who's interacted with me, and who's seen the comments that he's left in our discussions can see right through him. He was claiming that I was harassing him when I'm the one that originally blocked him on my main account, and he would tag me on his videos and other stuff about me. And then when I went on his page saying this is absurd, he would say that I was harassing him and stalking him. So this is just somebody who's really not okay psychologically. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the background of all of this.
Yeah, and then this leads us to the strongest possible argument. Apparently, the strongest possible argument, guys, like possible. Now I want to know what modality he thinks is possible. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna go there. All right, so yeah, does that tie up a nice bow? You're ready to?
Yeah, I'm ready to take this nonsense apart.
Yeah, it's strange. I went through it about 2 times. I didn't really jot any notes. I think this will just be easy just to kind of go through in real time. So we'll play the full video and then we will do the review. That way everybody can watch the video in full. It's only 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Illogical is the only logical resolution. Exactly. Yep.
This is about to be one of the dumbest videos you've ever seen in your life.
It's really bad.
Belief in God, the strongest possible argument. The problem with atheism today is this. It typically presents...
I said I wasn't going to pause it, but that's the thing that when I first heard it, I laughed so hard when it was like the strongest possible argument. The problem with atheists, I was like, wait, what the fuck do I have to do with your argument? Okay. Anyway, we're going to play the full video.
The challenge of prove God exists. Non-atheists enter a quagmire by accepting this faulty framing. When we discuss the question of belief, the applicable standard is not proof, but reasonableness. Is it reasonable to believe in God? The reason argument says yes. Why? Because of the origins paradox. Logic presents the human mind with only two possibilities. Either existence has always been, or it had a beginning. If we stay within the confines of logic, these scenarios are both incomprehensible and logically contradictory. The former not only claims that existence had no cause, but means that an infinity of time has elapsed up to this point, with every possible state of existence having already occurred. Not only is there no physical definition to the claim that an infinity of time has passed, or that an event has no cause, but the idea further leads to a contradictory causal loop, where one state of existence follows another, only to then be succeeded by the state that preceded it. The second possibility implies that existence came from nothing, which also not only provides zero explanation as to origins, but means that an alteration occurred when time did not exist, precluding the alteration itself. It is not, as Stephen Hawking stated, what lies south of the South Pole, but rather, how did the South Pole come to exist in the first place? So we have existence, but we have no logical means of accounting for that existence. Therefore, reason leads the human mind to the only conceptual resolution. A creationary force beyond logic must exist to account for existence. We call this force God, the source of reality. As with the previous two options, this force is incomprehensible to the human mind. But unlike the former options, it presents no paradox. Why? Because it supersedes logic, and thus, by definition, does not require any beginning, nor is it bound by any causality. Of even greater significance is that the God concept is derived from the structure of thought itself, as opposed to being invented or delivered from a purported authority. An atheist may object at this point and say, why not apply the beyond logic notion to the universe itself? Certainly, which again leads to a belief in God, specifically a form of theism called pantheism. This is the reason argument. Logic delivers two options on existence that are incomprehensible and paradoxical. The only conceptual resolution is the God concept. It remains incomprehensible, but resolves the paradox. These conditions more than satisfy the standard of reasonableness. Not only is theism reasonable, but it is more reasonable than its inverse, atheism. A stronger version of this argument would conclude that atheism is psychologically impossible, while a weaker version would conclude that theism and atheism are both rational positions, without ranking them. Again, this is not a proof of God, but rather the strongest basis for why belief in God is justified. It has nothing to do with validating any established religion.
Okay.
Like I said, the
research shows
dumbest...
nostalgia can help you remember ads.
Sorry.
Customize and save with Liberty Mutual.
And thus...
Okay, let me get back to the beginning.
It's impressive how many stupid things he can say in such a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Like all at once. How many wrong statements he makes that quickly is like a skill.
Yeah, it is impressive. It is like a stack of pancakes, but just fallacies. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so we will. I was trying to think of whether or not I should play these videos real quick. Rockstar, yeah, Rockstar. Tell me if you're dumber from watching that video, or like how you're feeling right now. We'll just kind of go through the video and then I'll play. I have a clip from Joe Schmidt and a clip from Oppie, just to kind of point out in the kind of metaphysical modality sense that when we're talking about explanations, or at least when we're giving like a necessary as some explanation for God, or whether he's brutally contingent or the initial state is necessary, that these concepts are debated in philosophy that this guy clearly has no knowledge about. It doesn't seem like he's ever even heard any of these arguments at all. So actually, we'll start with Joe, because Joe just gives a list of all these types of options. Now, I know he's not giving a type of like contingency argument, but he has this really weird narrow scope of what options you have available. And so I thought that this clip might be good to at least just start out with.
The so-called paradox is completely imaginary. There is
and I've tried to look, and if you look at origin paradoxes, you generally find like paradox from life from non-life. There's nothing in the literature. It's like the origins paradox, but at least I couldn't even find it. But I understand what you're trying to express. I just don't know why you gave it such a title that isn't expressed in the literature.
But he also has an incorrect view of infinity. Like he thinks that if we believe in something that's always, again, problematic is the term always, but that reality has always been, like necessarily so, that leads to an infinite regress of some sort. That's not actually true if you look at time in a specific way. But yeah, let's play the next clip.
Yeah, and so this will be quick. I just want to give this is just kind of a lot of the options that are available in these discussions that he's apparently unaware of, and then we'll get into the actual critique of the quote-unquote argument.
And for me, I'm agnostic on what the necessary foundation might be. I think there are boatloads of different proposals. There are certain theistic proposals, different models of God there, but there are non-theistic proposals, and those can be, categorized into naturalistic and non-naturalistic. So on the naturalistic side, it could be one or more quantum fields. It could be a universal wave function, which could be construed in either spatiotemporal and non-spatiotemporal terms. It might be a collection of mereological simples or physical simples. It might be relations a la ontic structural realism. It might be dynamic physical principles. David Gunn has a paper that he published in the Philosopher's Imprint, wherein he talks about this. It's called On the Ultimate Origination of Things. It could be the universe as a whole, a la Jonathan Schaffer's priority monism. It could be Graham Oppy's initial singularity. It could be matter or energy. Those are just the naturalistic non-theistic proposals, but there are also non-naturalistic non-theistic foundations that might be the foundation of reality. You could have a kind of Neoplatonic one, this absolutely simple impersonal being that emanates all of the rest of the complex realm that we see around us. It could be a kind of atheistic Thomism, as I call it. Not Thomism in the sense of, there's this absolutely simple divine being, but no, it is an absolutely simple being, but it's just not divine. It's just this impersonal being, which is subsistent existence itself. It's a purely actual being. Its essence is numerically identical with its existence, from which flows everything else, all the things in which essence and existence are distinct. You could kind of give an atheistic Thomistic view. You could have an atheistic Aristotelian, purely actual, unmoved movement.
Right. So you get the idea, right? There's a lot of this idea on reasonableness towards God, as if this is like the only option, is strange to me. So I just wanted to kind of point that out before we. I'll have to see if you want to go ahead and say anything that you want to say. That way I can set up the other video while I wait. But I don't know if you find that relevant to the discussion. I do.
No, I do. One thing I wanted to add was that, like I said, are you getting the Oppy video?
We can do that after we do this, because we'll kind of go into the view that I think me and you both share, which is kind of pretty much Oppy's view, if not extremely similar.
Yeah. But no, what I was going to say is that you don't have to posit an infinite regress. Like if you believe, or if the position is that there's some necessary aspect to reality itself, because nothingness is an incoherent concept, that doesn't imply an infinite regress, especially if you view time as just a measurement of change, because that necessary aspect of reality could have existed prior to any change, just existed because it's impossible for there to be nothing. And then time, in some sense, begins once change occurs from this initial state. So this might sound potentially counterintuitive, but it's not paradoxical. There's no paradox here. There's no contradiction here. It's just a different way of looking at time, and recognizing that we have to sort of leave some of our intuitions at the door when we want to get to the most I think, how would I say this? We're looking at reality on a deeper level. I think our day-to-day intuitions don't really pan out very well. So, and I mean, like you said, we heard in the video, he just calls these things a paradox, but doesn't actually expand on why they're paradoxes. He just states that they are. So, yeah, let's just go through it.
Belief in God, the strongest possible argument. The problem with atheism today.
This part really bothered me, is that the problem with atheism today, that isn't an argument, right? Like, the way an argument works is not complaining about your interlocutor. That's just not how an argument works. So if you're going to give, I mean, I understand you want to set up a specific dialectic like advantage for you so that you can just go from, well, I'm actually not worried about a deduct, because if I'm asking you as the interlocutor for a deductive argument and then you do this, you're now not telling me, right? You're just switching it to like whether or not it's reasonable. We can have that debate, but that just sounds like to me, yeah, in fact, I fucking don't have an argument. In fact, I can't give you a deductive argument that shows that God exists. I have none of that. My position's so weak that I just have to show that it's reasonable to believe in. I think that's absolutely fucking ridiculous, because the way that I'm going to look at reasonableness, at least in the case of, if you're just going to talk about the beliefs or the worldview that you have, then let's just do a worldview comparison. Let's see which one has better virtues, which one doesn't have, or it's the simpler theory, less axioms, less undefined predicates, ideological commitments, less types of entities or kinds of entities. I want to compare that in terms of like the potential options we have. There are views that you can compare to see if there's a trade-off between the commitments and the explanatory power. And the explanation part's the thing that I want to touch on the most when we get to it, because he clearly doesn't realize that when he's appealing to God, I mean, he's going to do it out of necessity. I mean, maybe he takes like a Swinburne view of like God being brutally contingent or something. It doesn't seem like that's the case. If he takes that view, then it just seems like to me that the naturalist has the same option for necessity of the initial state. We'll get into there, and you've already touched on a little bit of it, but
is this. It typically presents the challenge of prove God exists. Non-atheists enter a quagmire by accepting this faulty framing. When we discuss the question,
that's already no. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are some atheists that will say that, right? But usually it's not about proof. It's about providing evidence that your position is reasonable. I've never asked for proof of God because proof, from my perspective, is a mathematical concept. But yeah, you get people, generally speaking, that might say that. Just like you get theists who say prove God doesn't exist, who don't understand the burden of proof. But to just apply that to atheism in general is disingenuous. But go ahead.
Question of belief, the applicable standard is not proof, but reasonableness. Is it reasonable to believe in God? The reason argument.
So you're telling me, no, I don't actually have any proof, which would be some type of deductive argument. Nor do you even have a strong inductive case. But we're just going to go whether or not it's reasonable for you to hold the proposition to be true.
I mean, I would be fine with that.
Yeah.
If at least there was some basis for evidence, I would be fine with that. But he doesn't have that. He just has.
Well, what's worse is that what he establishes in the video wouldn't be something that me and you would sign off and say, okay, the belief in the proposition that God exists is reasonable under this assessment.
Right, exactly.
Right, and that's the problem. It's like, well, I'd be happy to concede it, but you failed, right? You did throughout this video. You don't do that. In fact, you actually give, you don't. It's actually not very reasonable. You haven't considered the other options, and you haven't even gone into like what explanation even is in this case, especially when we ask the question about the God you believe in. It exists of metaphysical necessity. I mean, and we're going to get into this, but that move, right? That has an you've explained it all. Why does it have to exist? Because it had to, right? Why did it have to? Well, that's where you run up with bruteness, right? It's where, I mean, if S is necessary, you don't appeal to R to explain S.
Right, exactly.
And so you get all the explanation there, but at the cost of a naturalist or an atheist or a non-naturalist who's an atheist being able to make the same move, whether it's like the Neoplatonic one or the initial state, right? Or any of the options that were listed by Joe in that clip.
Yes. Why? Because of the origins paradox. Logic presents the human mind.
Someone Google this for me. Tell me if you can find anything about this, right? Maybe I just have a dearth of knowledge. I understand the issues with origins that people talk about in the literature, but like everything I found on origins paradox was just about life from non-life. This is just not in the literature.
With only two possible.
And I'm willing to say that I'm wrong on that. But the label he's giving for the concern that most people can just think of in the armchair is really strange that he's just giving it this random title.
Abilities. Either existence has always been or it had a beginning. If we stay within the confines of logic, these scenarios are both incomprehensible and logically contradictory. The former not only claims that existence had no cause, but means that an infinity of time has elapsed up to this point, with every possible state of existence having already occurred. Not only is there no physical definition to the claim that an infinity of time has passed or that an event has no cause, but the idea.
He should talk with a mathematician or like understand. I mean, I don't know a lot about infinity, but he's clearly not up to. I would urge Joe Schmidt. He's an agnostic. He's not an atheist. Go look at his videos on how Hilbert Hotel style arguments fail or Grim Reaper style arguments fail. There isn't an established logical contradiction. In fact, William Lane Craig, who I'm sure this guy probably like worships, I could be wrong, but even William Lane Craig says that he just thinks I think he makes the claim that it's like a metaphysical impossibility, not a logic. He concedes that it's not a logical impossibility.
I also want to add that there is nothing incomprehensible about either of those views.
Well, and that doesn't even, my cognitive ability to, that's conflating like my epistemic limitations, not like the metaphysical possibilities. That's the same mistake that I think philosophers make when they try to say if it's conceivable, then it's metaphysically possible. That seems strange, right? No,
it doesn't follow.
It just seems like this is just a measure of my ignorance or a measure of my epistemic limitations, not metaphysical entailments on what actually
like you would think that.
No, Craig does, but he doesn't say it's a logical contradiction. And he backs off that train.
You would think that in the strongest possible argument,
at least if I'm thinking correctly,
he would go more into detail as to why these are contradictions, as to why these are incomprehensible, as to why these are paradoxes. He doesn't really do that. He just sort of just states it as such. But
yeah, and Ruxter, I'm just talking about the modal, like the logical modal sense, not the metaphysical. Of course, it's very crucial to his argument on actual infinites, but I've heard a clip of him stating he's like, well, I don't think it's a logical impossibility, and I'm pretty sure that's on Joe's channel, but I could produce the evidence. I'm pretty positive.
Idea further leads to a contradictory causal.
Oh, and by the way, let me state, me and Cease both don't take like an infinite series of events. I just don't do that out of parsimony or out of worldview comparison. It's just more complicated, and there's it's kind of, as Ruxter said, it's like it's ontologically less economical. So I mean, you're going to have a lot more to explain in that case than of just some initial state. So I'm kind of like with Oppie that I'm not going to die on the hill necessarily, but that's just the view that I do agree with. Just under comparison. So one, there is, I mean, he didn't give P and not P. If it's a contradiction, you have to show like what P and not P is, like what the proposition and the negation is. Otherwise, you're just making another assertion and just stacking them on top of each other.
This is what happens when amateurs driven by ego attempt to sound smart or like they're doing philosophy. Just putting that out there.
Sure. By the way, Ruxter, are you playing like the longest game of hide and seek lately? I haven't seen you in forever.
loop, where one state of existence follows another, only to then be succeeded by the state that preceded it. The second possibility implies that existence came from nothing, which also not only...
So this part is what actually pissed me off probably the most. Nothing in me and Cease's view implies a prior state of nothing. There's no nothing in our view.
Yep.
So if you just drew like, on the he has it right here. Just imagine. Can you see my mouse? No.
Yeah.
Just imagine that this is a ray, right? So it doesn't go infinite into the past. It's just right here. There's a point. That's the first moment of time. That moment's going to be t equals 0. This moment here will be t equals 1, t2, t3, t4, right? So on and so forth. At t4, you can say that there was some prior state or the events of t3 caused t4. But when you're at t0, there's nothing prior to that. The only move I have to make is the same move that the theist makes, that it exists of metaphysical necessity. Or why does God exist? Because he had to. Why does the initial state have to exist? Because it had to. And what sense does it begin to exist? Well, it's the first moment of time. It's initial. So there's a sense when we're cashing out what it means to begin to exist, which is something, especially like in the Kalam, you have to be careful on and get a definition on. That in this case, there is a sense where the universe begins to exist. There's no earlier moment, and there isn't a state of which prior to that moment. The inconceivability concerns, or the fact that it like fucks with your head, is not an argument. It's either going to be like personal incredulity that you can't imagine that, and that's great. You can commit a fallacy of personal incredulity. I don't care. Or you could just recognize that the only way to actually object is to show a contradiction or some type of inconsistency or problem. But I'll lay out the view for him really quick, right? The initial state is necessary. There isn't a prior moment, so the universe doesn't come from anything. There's no void at which it pops out from. There isn't going to be anything prior. And that's, if you take God to not be some infinite regression, but just like this initial item, it's not going to be seemingly anything different to the claim that it's just metaphysically necessary. In the view with the infinite series, what really matters here is when we're talking about possibility, it's all going to, at least in this view, it's all going to come from the initial necessary state, like God, right? Anything that's possible is going to come from different desires that God ends up actualizing. In this case, different, whether there's some quantum chancy event that it goes one way or the other. All those, right, we can talk about explanations that we both might have problems on. But at the offset, we've both posited something that exists of necessity. And if we agree that necessity is going to be an explanation for that thing, I don't see why it's privileged on theism or consciousness, or especially when your view is incoherent. It lays outside of time and lays outside of logic. Mine doesn't. Yeah. Right? Logic will be just descriptive of the world. Well, you could take a Platonist view, I guess. I'd want to keep that out or open. But I would have a view at which I don't have to appeal to all this extra ontological baggage, like timeless stuff or spaceless stuff or divine realm or any of that. I get the explanation in the initial state. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because there had to be. Is there a cause for the beginning? No, because the initial state is necessary. There's not a problem in that view from my understanding. And I don't know if you want to say something on that, Cease, while I pull up.
No, the only other thing I would say is that once you posit the metaphysically necessary state, then what we mean by a first moment in time is just the moment in which some change occurs. That's all that would mean. Like, I think people think that, or he might think there's some kind of paradox, or it's incomprehensible to think of something existing without time existing. But if you look at time as just a measurement of change, then that fundamental state that we're saying is metaphysically necessary just exists, and then the change that occurs from that state is where time would then be applied as a measurement. There is no problem here. There's no contradiction here. There's no paradox here. All there is this guy who doesn't understand these topics, who clearly hasn't done the work to educate himself on the literature regarding to these topics, just wants to shouts and act like he's some kind of authority. Because again, in my interactions with him, I've recognized that this person is driven by ego. He wants to make himself feel like he's smarter than other people. He cannot handle being criticized. I don't know him or his background, but this is just my understanding of what I think his psychology is. And I think he's somebody that was probably very much bullied in his lifetime and needs to feel superior to other people, which is why he lashes out at anybody who calls him out for his bullshit. So, yeah.
All right, and I'll just play this clip quickly, just as a reference for the view.
Think about the contingency arguments.
Now, obviously, this is the reason why I find this to be related, at least for people that aren't as familiar, is when we're going to talk about explanations here, and his concern that he expresses about explanations. This is why it's apt to the. I mean, because I don't even know if he knows what a contingency argument is. Maybe he does, but nonetheless, it's applicable.
So, in the version where we're saying that there's a kind of maximal contingent fact, and it's got to have an explanation. So there's got to be a necessary fact that explains. So I guess there are two things I want to say about that. One is there's sort of Van Inwagen's worry. What's the connection between the necessary thing and the contingent thing? If it's necessary, then surely the connected thing is necessary. But if it's contingent, then that wasn't the sum of contingency after all, because there was this connection to the necessary thing that we left out.
So that's one concern I wanted to raise, and I'm not sure if he's like even thought of this, but if he does just end up making this view that God's necessary and it's outside of logic and all this stuff, whatever his view is, if it just ends up being that it's of metaphysical necessity or brutally contingent, well, in his view, I'm certain it's probably of necessity. That one, he hasn't really. We have to understand whether or not all the facts that he thinks are subsequent to God are necessary facts or contingent. Like, presumably he's going to think that they're contingent. And so what Oppie is expressing is there's this kind of worry, like you have the necessary thing and then it's explaining the contingent facts, but there's something in the middle of that that's not really been given an analysis, which is the link between those things, right? How do you go from the necessary to the contingent as opposed to just necessary domino effect of, right? Now, in his case, he could just have God has one, necessary desire or something. And so you only get the one possible world. Mm-hmm. But it seems that he's going to miss out on explanation that if it's contingent, because the initial state on his view is going to be brutally contingent upon God's desires. And there isn't going to be an explanation if we just ask the question, well, why did God make world A as opposed to world B? He's going to say, well, God had some choice, or so there was some freedom there. But there isn't going to be anything that actually explains why he chooses one over the other. So it's this idea that he tries to profess later in the video that he's getting some explanation or he's winning out on explanation just seems to not be true, at least from my eyes, because we don't have an explanation for why God chooses one world over another or any world at all, right? Why he doesn't just to continue to just exist as a mind alone, not creating any external world. And so I wanted to bring that up because it's turning out to not look very reasonable on the view that he's expressing, because it doesn't seem he's considered these things. And so when he's talking about it, is it reasonable to believe? Well, no, because you kind of shoved all this extra stuff, the stuff that's important in philosophy, and you kind of just said, fuck it, I'm just going to slide it to the side and just be like, oh, there's this paradox where like it can't be an infinite regression. And if there's a beginning, something caused it, or it came from nothing. And right. It's like, you're not even focused on what's actually in the literature, whether you agree with this or not. I mean, I can't take you seriously, or I can't say that your position's reasonable, or that the whole point of his argument is that I come to a belief in the proposition being true. And is this reasonable? Well, maybe, but so far the analysis you've given, no, not at all. It's not reasonable.
He just created a false dichotomy from the get-go. Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I'll let this continue and then we'll get back to the.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's a genuine worry, but I mean, I also think that there's no problem with the naturalist view that supposes that the initial state is necessary and then that the evolution of state is indeterministic. So you're going to get contingency at all later stages, right?
And so that's important because maybe and Amdir could talk on this better probably than I can, but it does seem that, okay, you can get contingency at the cost of some indeterminate link. And now, he doesn't express his theological views, so I don't know. What he might be, a Christian or Muslim, or he might just be like a theist just in general. But if you do have these theological concerns, then this will rear its head for those views. They're not really germane to the kind of argument he's giving, admittedly, so I'm not going to focus on that. But
that's not thinking now about facts, but rather thinking about things. The kind of evolution of state of the universe seems to me to mean that if you're a naturalist, you can give this contingency argument, right? Where does all this contingency come from? Well, actually, it comes from the necessary initial state and the kind of necessary operation of the indeterministic laws. That's where it comes from. Right.
Yeah.
All right, so just the Joe clip and the Oppie clip, they're not necessarily like hugely important. They are just to express that these views, he's not even considering any of these views. It doesn't seem like he's heard of them, and it seems I don't know, it seems strange that I haven't gotten the full picture on the view, so it seems a little hard to assess whether or not it's reasonable. And then we get to the end of your video, and it points out pretty quickly that it's not reasonable based on your analysis. But yeah, Cease, if you want to, I don't know if you want to add anything to that while I pull the clip back up.
Again, you would expect him to go into detail as to why these issues are paradoxes, and maybe does he do that? And I just don't remember because we just watched the video. I don't remember him going into detail about any of that.
Oh no, it's a 2-minute video. He doesn't go into any detail. He tries to conflate it to being a causal loop, but there's other options there.
So again, this is just him not knowing what he's talking about. And look, I've challenged him to debate me live. He's made excuses after excuses. So I'm sure that he's going to come up with more videos about me slandering me and all kinds of more of that stuff. I'm not interested in a back and forth with him without an end. It's just a waste of my time. I might address it from time to time here and there, but for the most part, I'm gonna probably leave it here at this video. If he makes a response to the actual points as opposed to just want to,
that would be good. We could
paint me as some kind of monster because he's mentally ill. I'm not really gonna address the lies that he's said about me more than I already have. So.
Provides zero explanation as to origins, but means that an alteration, it's zero explanation existence that preceded it. The second possibility implies that existence came from nothing, which also not only
So by the way, his argument's dead. Right here, it's dead. Because there was no consideration of the view. He doesn't go into the initial state, at least from what I remember. Hopefully, maybe nearly 99% positive. I always want to leave the 1% in case I look stupid. But his argument's already dead here, especially since it's a straw man. There is no from nothing in the view that I'm expressing. So my consideration of my view hasn't even been considered for this video. So I can't determine that it's reasonable. You didn't consider my view. You didn't actually exhaust the candidate options.
Provides zero explanation as to origins, but means that an alteration occurred when time did not exist, precluding the alteration itself. It is not, as Stephen Hawking stated, what lies south of the South Pole, but rather, how did the South Pole come to exist in the first place? So we have existence, but we have no logical means of accounting for.
Yeah, so the same way in necessity that God has to exist of like a metaphysical necessity, great. I don't have to appeal to like the the modological sense, I just will say it exists of metaphysical necessity. Boom, done. You do the same thing in your view. I'm not really understanding when he talks about accounting for if it's necessary.
That is the accounting for it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people can argue against this view. I mean, I want to be charitable. There's people that might say that, like, there is a further explanation to why God's necessary or something. I think that's incoherent.
Yeah,
I mean, if
right.
S is necessary, I don't see how you appeal to R to explain S. If
Yeah.
S is necessary, I mean, it seems that, well, S had to exist. Well, why? When you ask about an explanation, why did S have to exist? I mean, you just run up to bruteness at that point. Just from the view that I'm going to hold to. And further, it's like with the view of modality that at least I've adopted at this point. I mean, it's any kind of concerns you have downstream or something is fine. But I have an account for the initial state in a similar fashion that the theist does, but I have less ontological commitments. So they're going to have to just show me why I actually do need to add those things. And this argument or this video doesn't seem to address any of that.
For that existence. Therefore, reason leads the human mind to the only conceptual resolution. A creationary force beyond logic must exist to account for existence. We call this.
Amdir, what do you think about this beyond logic explanation? Is this illogical explanation, if you will, or illogical?
At that point, if you're gonna say beyond logic and then try to conceive of anything of what that could mean, they're just completely meaningless. Doesn't mean anything to say beyond logic. You already conceded that you have no argument at that point. So.
Force God, the source of reality. As with the previous two options, this force is incomprehensible.
We'll go back.
Four, reason leads the human mind to the only conceptual resolution. A creationary force beyond logic must exist to account for existence. We call this force God, the source of reality. As with the previous two options, this force is incomprehensible to the human mind. But unlike the former options, it presents no paradox. Why? Because it supersedes logic, and thus, by definition, does not require any beginning, nor is it bound by any causality. Of even greater significance is that the God concept is.
Yeah, that was a really good question. What account for? I mean, essentially, I'm taking him to mean an explanation, right, for the phenomena, or what's. I mean, if you want to break it down as simply as possible, it's something rather than nothing in this case, because his concern about. He says it, I think, up here soon, that an atheist could just say, what about the universe being this? But he's not actually appealing to the view that was expressed by like Oppie or any of the views that Joe and the clips that I posted express. He just has this like dimension, like, I don't know, one-dimensional mind track or track of mind that somehow this is the only rational conclusion, which is clearly false.
Is derived from the structure of,
and I don't even know like what it means beyond logic or beyond time. I mean, one, I don't even know, using notions that are tethered to like temporal notions or like they're constitutive of being temporal, how that even makes sense to divorce yourself from the temporal notions and then use the same term. That seems incoherent.
Of thought itself, as opposed to being invented or delivered from a purported authority. An atheist may object at this point and say, why not apply the beyond logic notion to the universe itself? Certainly, which again leads to a belief in God, specifically a form of
how? Yeah. That was the thing that he said that I was like, wait, how does that? How would being like the universe is necessary? Let's get his words exactly right.
At this point and say, why not apply the beyond logic notion?
Well, no one's going to be dumb and use the beyond logic notion. They're not going to, like, they would just be stuffing a bunch of nothingness into the bag. I don't know why they would do that.
To the universe itself, certainly, which again leads to a belief in God, specifically a form of theism called pantheism. This is the reason argument. Logic delivers two options on existence that are incomprehensible and paradoxical.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems exactly that's what he's saying, right?
I mean, he keeps saying there is nothing about atheism that leads to something, the explanation being incomprehensible or paradoxical. He keeps saying this, but it's not.
Oh, that's great. I don't think he'll track that.
The only conceptual resolution is the God concept. It remains incomprehensible, but resolves the paradox. These conditions more than satisfy the standard of reasonableness.
He doesn't. How can you say that it's incomprehensible and yet a concept that resolves the paradox? Why? Because you say it's beyond logic.
Wait, hold on. But didn't he say earlier that keep going? I'm gonna look for it. Didn't he say that it was incomprehensible here?
Yeah,
Somewhere about the view that he was.
Says it's incomprehensible, but that somehow because it's beyond logic.
Well, but look, the view that he was giving here about the infinite series of past events was incomprehensible. And I guess he avoids the contradictory stuff because, well, P and not P doesn't apply to my God. There's what are you talking about? I think he means epistemic, like cognitive limitations, or like epistemic kind of bounds, which if that's the case, then he's just admitting the view I have is conceptually opaque. I don't actually have epistemic access to it, but it's reasonable to think, right, that I would be able to believe the proposition, let alone it being conceptually opaque and not having epistemic access to it, which seemingly is a contradiction. Presumably belief is part of his theory of knowledge, but oh my God. All right, I'll go back. But yeah, anyway.
And paradoxical. The only conceptual resolution is the God concept. It remains incomprehensible, but resolves the paradox. These conditions more than satisfy the standard of reasonableness. Not only is theism reasonable, but it is more reasonable than its inverse, atheism. A stronger version of this argument would conclude
to say that it resolves reasonableness when you've just said it's beyond logic is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard anybody say.
Amdir says, why can't we just say that the ontology of logic is incomprehensible then? That doesn't commit us to saying that we can't know contradictions don't exist, etc. Amdir, I don't think, ontology is going to be a word he'll have to even look up, but I love Impulse, by the way, just like with his little laughing. Like I can just see him chuckling at his desk.
That atheism is psychologically impossible.
So atheism, by the way, is psychologically impossible. It's crazy. I must be a dialetheist then. Because like if it's impossible in virtue of a contradiction, then I guess I'm a dialetheist.
Weaker version would conclude that theism and atheism are both rational positions without ranking them. Again, this is not a proof of God, but rather the strongest basis for why belief in God is justified. It has nothing.
The many white people who mean right and then.
Okay. I don't know. I got Denzel Washington. I don't know. That was a suggested clip. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck that was. Yeah, so it clearly isn't the most reasonable case. That's not the strongest. It's one of the weakest things I've heard. I mean, I've said a lot on this already. Cease, I don't know if you want to.
Again, I asked.
Psychological possibility is my favorite modality. That's what I told him in the comments. I said, look, I said, your understanding of modality is adorable. I'll be doing a response to this today. So,
well, again, I ask, where is the paradox? He has just stated there is a paradox. Where is the paradox in posing a necessary, metaphysically necessary initial state from which everything else is derived from? Where is the contradiction? Where is the paradox? He wants to say that there is some paradox within the notion of infinity, but I haven't mentioned infinity in that view. That any notion of infinity isn't needed in that view because we're not talking about an infinite regress of causes.
Nor do you have a state of nothing in the other side of the horn that he offered,
which he has assumed are the only options that can come from an atheistic perspective. So again, it's delusional on every level. He hasn't provided an argument. The second he said it beyond logic, you're not creating arguments anymore.
Yeah, I kind of take it not to be reasonable when someone goes, my view is not going to be based on I'm going to go beyond logic.
And I'm going to call it incomprehensible.
I'm going to go beyond modal logic here.
I'm going to call it incomprehensible, but say that's okay because it's beyond logic, therefore more reasonable. Like, I mean, it's just mind-numbingly stupid. I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, I think Amdir's right. I think the psychological possibility, that modality we just don't know about, and atheism really is psychologically impossible. So, yeah, I mean, there's not really much else I can go on that. There's 1,000 points why that doesn't make sense. I mean, for one, I know he doesn't look at it this way, but it seems like a bait and switch when I'm being told there's an argument for God, and then I go to it and it's like, hold on. Actually, in fact, I don't have a proof for God. I just am going to show why I think believing the proposition is reasonable. And then he lists out the reason and ignores a whole bunch of stuff, creates some dichotomy that's not really the case, right?
It doesn't explain why it's a paradox, and states that the resolution is to go beyond logic, beyond comprehension, and yet still hold to some notion of reasonableness. Oh God, it doesn't make any sense. Nothing of that video makes any sense.
Belief in God.
Yeah.
Belief in God is reasonable. Yeah, so
I don't think there's much.
If anybody wants to, I don't know, has a question before we bounce. I guess we were going to do like an hour-ish show. I think we might get, I don't know, Caesar, are you going to get on TikTok after this? We might transfer this over for a TikTok live or whatnot. I don't have a ton of time on live tonight, but I think I could make it for a few if you do.
Yeah, I think I'll jump on for a few minutes. I'm pretty tired myself. It's been
where I'm at today.
One day, so.
What is metaphysically primary? I'd say Amdir's sack on my chest. That's metaphysically primary to everything.
Mike, I want to do a show on where we talked about propositions yesterday.
Yeah, I gotta walk my dog because Amdir's posting questions that I can't answer in the comments. No, sorry. The proposition stuff. Yeah, me and actually would be really good. Would be
to get Max up there as well.
Well, that would be, I think it'd be really good because I've gone through this argument. Like, Amdir has maybe some concerns on it. Potentially Max with his predicate dualism and like the views that he has on language and philosophy of language. I'm wondering, and then you're kind of seeing both sides of those waters, right? I mean, you're trying to like look at it from the middle. The objections I gave to you yesterday, I find to be a problem for the view. I just don't know if maybe it's a mistake. I mean, there's obviously the issue that there could be something just mistaken in the initial argument that I have in the first place, but also the objections that I think might allow someone to get out of the argument might be mistaken as well. So that's always my concern is how I'm making the actual argument, because I think
we can go into it next time, and
I'm not as precise as I probably should be.
That's fine. Yeah, we can get into it next time. I think that would be a valuable show to go over. Also, other shows we have planned is I'm trying to get a trends creator from TikTok to come up and go over some misconceptions that conservatives have about the trans lived experience. Another episode I would like to do is Mike, you want to talk about the we said about Jesus being a
apocalyptic preacher. Yeah,
an apocalyptic preacher.
Yep.
Yeah, we're gonna try to make more consistent content soon.
Yeah, and then I'll try to do a video on I'm like compiling a document on Oppie's view. Basically, it's just like taking best arguments from gods and putting it. And then that'll just be like I want to start doing this thing where I don't know how dedicated I'll be to this. This is what I want to do. This is what I've wanted to do since the start of the show, is take someone like a Quine or a Putnam, Swinburne or Oppie, and give a nice slideshow like synopsis of the views, and kind of just build this archive of philosophers and their views, kind of like a, Kane B and stuff that people do, but maybe a little bit more like digestible or something for people that aren't as into philosophy. I don't know. I'm trying to think. It's just something I've wanted to do because I think it's a good archive for people to go back on. I just always second guess myself with making sure I'm relaying the information correctly. So maybe I'll just put like a note at the beginning. I might suck, so apologies.
I think you worry too much about that.
Maybe. Anyway, yeah, guys, we appreciate the coming on board and enjoying that with us. That was pretty painful. His train of thought's like hard to like even tie down, because it's just so much shit at one time.
By the way, MDR, I forgot to send you that file, but we actually posted it on the channel on YouTube yesterday, so you can just go there and look at it there. The whole conversation with Aiden is up there. So
sure. And that's right, we did upload that video last night, so go check that out if you haven't already. For barter, you should look up actual stuff in the literature on this topic.
And for butter, you should probably
stop embarrassing yourself.
You should probably go on medication because you do not sound like you're psychologically stable.
I don't know him like that, but based on the stuff that you guys have had and the partial point of the videos, I'd be concerned myself. But with that, guys, take care, everybody. Everybody do. What does Steve always say at the end of his lives? He said, "Oh, I'm gonna go walk my fish." That's right. Everybody, be careful. I gotta go walk my fish. I don't know. Says something funny. I'm trying to be like Steve. Anyway, peace out, guys.
See you next time.
Deuces. Amdir, if you're still here, I did send that doc in the Instagram chat. It's 13 pages and it is not edited at all. I sent it to Guido as well. Thank you, everybody. We love you.